David Grann's 2017 nonfiction book, Killers of the Flower Moon, reveals a dark chapter in U.S. history when extreme wealth brought death and devastation to the Osage Nation. While the story was recently adapted into a film by director Martin Scorsese, a movie can only go so far into the gut-wrenching tale of greed and betrayal. So, today we're going to take a look at the true story behind Killers of the Flower Moon. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other true crime stories you would like to hear about. Okay, there's oil in them hills, and a whole lot of victims. In 1865, the Osage Nation negotiated the purchase of the part of Oklahoma that would become their reservation. The first decades of life there were characterized by poverty and hardship, but the discovery of oil on reservation land changed everything. Because the Osage had purchased the land using Osage Nation funds, that ownership gave them more rights over the land than those enjoyed by most other Native American groups at the time. Negotiations in 1906 resulted in the Osage holding onto the oil, gas, coal, and other minerals covered by the lands for 25 years. Registered members of the Osage Nation were to receive an equal share of the royalties, rents, sales, or bonuses arising from the mineral profits. That share was called head rights, and it made the Osage Nation wealthy. Starting in 1916, the Osage leased via public auctions, and competition drove more and more revenue into Osage coffers. Head rights resulted in thousands of dollars for individual Osage members. In 1920, the Bismarck Tribune reported that individual Osage members would earn roughly $10,000 annually, while a family of 5 would receive $50,000. For context, $50,000 in 1920 was roughly the equivalent of $775,000 in 2023. So we're not talking about a few coins here. In 1920, a representative of the Board of Indian Commissioners who visited the Osage told Congress, "They're almost, if not quite, dazed by wealth. They do not know what they are doing. They have never been trained, nor have they had the opportunity to learn what it all means." So, in 1921, the federal government implemented a system of guardianship to address the perceived inability of the Osage to handle the wealth that had been thrust upon them. To that end, Congress also decided that only competent members of the Osage Nation would receive full allotment payments. All other allotment payees would be limited to $4,000 annually. To prove competence, an Osage had to demonstrate sobriety, sound financial decision-making, and Christian values. When a guardian was appointed for a member of the Osage Nation, that person was chosen by a local court. It was usually a lawyer or real estate professional. Guardians charged the Osage for their services, essentially paying themselves out of their wards' allotments. They would also use the money for the Osage wards to make purchases on their own behalf. Because with so much money changing hands, who's gonna notice? From 1921 to 1925, dozens of Osage perished under suspicious circumstances. Even more suspicious was that many of them were related to a woman named Mollie Burkhart, played in the film by Lily Gladstone. This series of events, which the Osage would come to call the Reign of Terror, started with the deaths of Anna Brown and Charles Whitehorn in May of 1921. Brown's body was discovered in a ravine in Oklahoma with a bullet mark to the back of her head. 3 years earlier, his sister, Minnie, had succumbed to a peculiar wasting illness. Just 2 months after Brown's body was found, her mother, Lizzie, would experience the same fate. Lizzie and her daughters all possessed head rights, and after their passing, those head rights were transferred to Lizzie's 2 remaining children, Mollie and Rita. Both Mollie and Rita were married to white men who also served as their guardians. Mollie was married to Ernest Burkhart, the guy Leo plays in the movie, and Rita was married to Bill Smith. Smith had also been married to Minnie and wed Rita shortly after Minnie's death. Hey, the heart wants what it wants, and maybe it wants head rights. While Mollie was skeptical of Smith, he did work alongside private investigators hired by Mollie to try and find out what happened to Anna. Meanwhile, the death toll continued to rise. In February 1923, the body of Henry Roan Horse, Anna's cousin and a full-blooded Osage, was found in his car. And a month after Roan's body was discovered, a bomb went off at the Smith residence in Fairfax, Oklahoma. Rita and the Smith's housekeeper Nettie perished instantly, and Smith succumbed to his injuries a few days later. There were non-Osage casualties of the Reign of Terror as well. For instance, after the Osage Nation asked white oilman Barney McBride to urge the federal government to investigate the deaths in 1922, the trusted businessman was beaten, robbed, and fatally stabbed. Another non-Osage death was that of William Vaughn, who had received information about the Osage slayings from a deceased client. Vaughn was supposed to take a train back to Pawhuska to relay the information to the sheriff, but he never arrived. His unclothed body was found near the railroad tracks several days later. It was probably not natural causes. As of March 1923, Mollie was the sole Osage survivor of her family, and that meant Mollie's husband, Ernest, stood to take control of the head rights should anything happen to her. Ernest was the nephew of William K. Hale. Hale, that's De Niro in the film, was a rancher who was known as the King of the Osage Hills due to the large amount of wealth he'd accumulated. Hale was known to lie, cheat, and manipulate to make money. And, according to later FBI records, Hale completely dominated his weak-willed nephew. While Mollie had no claim to Henry Roan Horse's head rights, she had previously been bonded to Roan in the Osage tradition. Even if it had not been a legal marriage, it still presented a potential problem for Ernest and, in turn, Hale. However, Roan considered Hale one of his close friends. And as a member of the Osage Nation who received limited allotment payouts, Roan often went to Hale for money. Roan was so indebted to Hale that the latter even took out a life insurance policy on Roan for $25,000. Totally normal, not at all suspicious for one best friend to take out a life insurance policy on the other. I mean, that's how you know they're your best friend, right? Local investigations into the deaths of members of the Osage Nation and accusations of guardianship abuses achieved little success. Many Osage were distrustful of law enforcement, and it's believed Hale had enough influence to control both the police and the courts. The Osage Tribal Council approached the Justice Department for help investigating the slayings in the spring of 1923, but the federal agents did no better than their local counterparts. In the wake of that debacle, J. Edgar Hoover, the new head of the BOI, the organization that would become the FBI, dispatched Special Agent Tom White to the Oklahoma City Bureau office to take over the investigation. White, played by Jesse Plemons in the movie, was told in no uncertain terms, there can be no excuse offered for failure. By the time White arrived in Oklahoma in 1925, the BOI had assumed jurisdiction of many of the Osage murders. White had a group of agents working under him, both undercover and out in the open. Slowly, the team worked their way through the suspect list. One man, Brian Burkhart, caught White's attention. He was Ernest Burkhart's brother and another of Hale's nephews. He had also dated Anna Brown and was among the last individuals to see her alive. It then came to light that Hale was close with David and James Shown, doctors who had performed an inadequate assessment of Brown's body. The Showns had also met with Bill Smith shortly before he passed. And somehow, James Shown emerged from that conversation as the administrator of Rita's estate. Slowly, White realized how many connections existed between the Osage murders and Hale, but he still lacked solid evidence. As White and his team searched for viable leads, they were put in touch with several informants and potential witnesses. Curly Johnson, for example, was supposed to know about the bombing, but he died before White could locate him. Another person of interest was Henry Grammer, a rodeo star who had reportedly been with Hale at the time of the Smith bombing. But again, when White attempted to track him down, he found out the man had perished in a car accident. Should have stuck to horses. Still, one more name that White came across was Asa Kirby, an explosives expert. But Kirby had been fatally wounded in a failed robbery shortly after Grammer's accident. If you think it's a bit suspicious that all three of White's potential witnesses wound up dead, you're not alone. White thought the same thing. In October 1925, Bert Lawson, a prisoner at the penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma, told White that he worked for Bill Smith in 1918, and he had been friendly with Hale and both Burkharts. Lawson quit his job in 1921 and was later approached by Ernest Burkhart about whacking Smith. Ernest eventually offered Lawson $5,000 to do the deed, but Lawson still said he wouldn't. At least, that's what he said at first. But Lawson eventually agreed to blow up the Smiths using a bomb given to him by Hale and Ernest Burkhart. He even said Hale transported him to and from the Smiths' house on the night of the bombing. There were contradictions in his confession, but White was under pressure from Hoover to move forward. So on January 4, 1926, he issued warrants for the arrest of William K. Hale and Ernest Burkhart for the murders of Rita and Bill Smith, as well as Nettie Brookshire, their housekeeper. On January 6, 1926, Ernest Burkhart confessed to the FBI about his involvement in the murders of Nettie Brookshire and Bill and Rita Smith, and said that Hale was behind the plan. You may insert your Ernest goes to jail jokes here. Hale had approached several men about setting the bomb, including Asa Kirby, the explosion expert. Burkhart also implicated a man named John Ramsey in Henry Horse Roan's death. However, Burkhart was hesitant to provide any details about the slaying of Anna Brown, likely because he didn't want to implicate his brother. More on that in a bit. Eventually, he gave the FBI Kelsey Morrison, a mysterious man who had been seen with Brown on the last night of her life. White apprehended Ramsey, who was later also charged with the murder of Bill Smith. Morrison, who admitted killing Brown with the help of Ernest's brother Brian Burkhart, would later testify against Hale, telling the court he had wanted to eradicate all of the members of Mollie Burkhart's family so Ernest would get it all. Hale and Ramsey were put on trial 4 times in federal courts before finally receiving life sentences for the murder of Henry Horse Roan in 1929. Hale was sent to prison in Leavenworth, Kansas, where he served 18 years. Ernest Burkhart was sentenced by a state court to life imprisonment for the death of the Smiths, but was eventually paroled. Kelsey Morrison and Brian Burkhart turned state witness, but Morrison was slain in a police shootout in 1937. No one knows exactly how many people were slain during the Reign of Terror, and the conventionally cited dates of 1921 through 1925 merely highlight when a large number of known crimes took place. In truth, however, evidence of foul play in order to obtain head rights exists as early as 1918 and as late as 1938. During that span, as many as 60 murders may have occurred, and the number may have been in the hundreds. But the Reign of Terror itself came to an end after William K. Hale was hauled in. The United States Congress would amend the law in 1925 to prohibit any non-Osage from inheriting head rights, preventing another Reign of Terror from ever happening again. So what do you think? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.